Welcome to another episode of Reality Roundtable. I'm your host, Jonathan Brown. And alright, I want to start this episode a little different. So let's just slow this down for a second. Wherever you are right now, whatever you're doing, I just want you to take a deep breath really quick. Because what we're finna talk about today isn't complicated, but it is one of those things that can quietly change your life if you actually apply it. And that is just staying open minded. Not in a cliche way, not in a yeah, I'm open minded type of way, but really asking yourself, am I actually open to new perspectives? Because a lot of us think we are until something challenges what we already believe. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately. How easy it is to get comfortable in your own way of thinking. Like, once you feel like you figured something out, you kind of lock in. You stop questioning it, you stop exploring, you stop being curious, and you don't even realize it's happening. And the crazy part is, the world doesn't just stop moving because you got comfortable. Everything keeps evolving. New ideas, new technology, and new ways of doing things. And if your mindset stays the same, you slowly start falling behind without even noticing it. Not because you're not capable, but because you stop being open. And I think that's the difference. It's not about knowing everything, it's about being willing to keep learning and being a forever student. Even when it's convenient, even when it challenges you, even when it makes you feel like, dang, I might be wrong about that. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually called growth. Because if we're being real, we all have our own way of seeing things based on how we grew up, what we've been through, and what we've been told. And over time, that turns into assumptions, judgment, and quick opinions. And sometimes we don't give things a chance. We just decide what it is immediately. But when you start being more open minded, you create a little space between your first reaction and what you actually believe. And in that space, you start to see things differently. You start to realize you don't know everything. And honestly, this is where things start to get interesting. Because here's something I've noticed. A lot of people say they want to grow. Trust me, everybody says that. But not everybody wants to change. And that's the part that matters. Because growth requires change. And there's no way around that. You can't keep thinking the same way, doing the same things, avoiding the same risk, and expect a different result. And being open minded makes that a little bit easier. It doesn't make it easy, just a little bit easier. Because instead of fighting the change, you start getting curious about it. Like, what if this is actually going to help me? And what if there's a better way that I haven't tried yet? And that mindset shift alone can take you further than you think. And something else comes with that, and that is creativity. When you're open minded, you start seeing things a little bit differently. Like your brain isn't stuck in one lane anymore. You start connecting ideas. You start asking, what if? You start experimenting a little more. And that's where creativity really comes from. Not from having all the answers, but being willing to explore. Closed minds want certainty. Open minds are okay with possibilities. And over time, that kind of mindset changes how you think about life in general. You stop being so focused on immediate results or instant gratification. You start thinking more long term, like, where is this actually taking me? Is this helping me grow, or is this going to keep me comfortable? And those real questions, because comfort can look good in the moment, but it doesn't always lead anywhere. And I think this also connects to burnout as well. Because when you're stuck in one way of doing things and it's not working, things start to get frustrating fast. But when you're open minded, you give yourself options. You adjust, you pivot, and you try something different. And that flexibility makes things a little lighter, a little less overwhelming. Because you're not forcing it anymore, you're figuring it out. And honestly, this might be the biggest one. Being open minded changes how you deal with people. Because most disagreements aren't actually really about the situation, they're about perspective. People see things differently based on their experiences, their environment, and their mindset. And when you're not open to that, everything turns into a conflict. But when you're open, you start listening a little bit differently. You start listening not to just respond, but you actually start listening to understand where they're coming from. And that changes everything. It changes relationships, conversations, and how you handle disagreements. You realize you don't have to agree with somebody to understand them. And before you click off from this episode, I want you to just stay here a little bit longer. Because the idea of being open minded, it goes deeper than what we usually talk about. Like we've touched on growth, perspective, all of that. But let's add another layer to this. And it's a little bit more uncomfortable. Let's talk about ego for a second. Because a lot of the time, what keeps us closed minded isn't a lack of intelligence, but it's actually our own pride. And that feeling of, I already know, I've already got this figured out. And if we're being real, nobody likes being wrong. Nobody likes realizing that they've been thinking about something the wrong way for many years. But that's part of the process. That's part of growth. And the faster you get comfortable with that feeling, the faster you will evolve. Because every time you let go of that feeling of needing to be right, you actually make space to actually learn something. Another thing that comes with being open minded is letting go of control. And trust me, I know this one's going to be tough because we all want certainty. We all want things to make sense. We all want clear answers. But life doesn't always work like that. Sometimes you're stepping into situations where you don't have all the information, where you don't know how it's going to play out. And if your mind is closed, that uncertainty feels scary. But if your mind is open, that same uncertainty can feel like an opportunity. Like, let me see where this goes. Let me figure this out as I go. And that shift makes life feel a lot less restrictive. And here's something a lot of people don't talk about. Sometimes growth isn't about learning something new, but it's actually about unlearning something old. Now let that sit for a second. Because there are beliefs, habits, ways of thinking that we picked up years ago that just don't serve us anymore. But we tend to hold on to them because they feel familiar. Being open minded means questioning all of that and asking yourself, is this actually true? Is this actually helping me? Or is this just something I always believed? And that right there, it takes honesty, real honesty. Because sometimes the thing holding you back is something that you've been holding on to for a long time. And your environment plays a huge role in this as well. The people around you, the content you consume, the conversations that you have, all of that shapes how you think. So if you're constantly around the same ideas, the same perspectives, the same ways of thinking, it becomes easy to stay in that box. But when you start exposing yourself to different points of view, different experiences, different ways of living, your mind will expand naturally. And you don't even have to force it. You just start seeing more, understanding more, and questioning more. Now, let's talk about discomfort, because this is where a lot of people shut down. The moment something feels uncomfortable, we tend to pull back. We reject it, we avoid it. But what if that discomfort is actually a signal? Not that something is wrong, but that something is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar doesn't always mean bad. It just means you're stepping outside of what you know. And that's where growth happens. So instead of rejecting discomfort, what if you actually leaned into it a little bit? Not blindly though, but with some curiosity. Now, let me be clear about something. Being open minded does not mean you believe everything. It doesn't mean you don't have standards, and it doesn't mean that you don't think for yourself. There's a difference between being open minded and being easily influenced. Being open minded means you're willing to listen, consider, and then decide. You still filter things out and you still use judgment, but you don't shut down things immediately. You give yourself a chance to understand first. So, how do you actually apply this in real life? It's small things, it's not always big dramatic moments. It's catching yourself when you say, that doesn't make sense. And instead of asking, why does that make sense to them? It's trying a different approach. Even when your usual way feels easier, it's having conversations with people who think differently than you. It's being okay with saying, I don't know. Because the moment you admit you don't know, you actually open the door to learning. So, yeah, if you really think about it, being open minded isn't just a trait, it's a continuous practice. Something you choose over and over again in the conversations you have, in the decisions you make, and how you choose to react to things. And the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. You stop feeling threatened by different perspectives and you start learning from them. You stop resisting change and you start growing through it. And over time, you become a completely different version of yourself. Not because you forced it, but because you stayed open minded. So, yes, just keep that in mind. Stay open minded, stay curious, and don't box yourself in. This has been another episode of Reality Roundtable. I'm your host, Jonathan Brown, and I'll catch you on the next episode next week, Wednesday at 12 p.m. Sorry for being late for this episode. Thank you, and take care.